People who lied in their resume and actually got the job they were unqualified for. What ended up happening? Attention, if you plan to give examples of a bad inappropriate email address on a resume, do not post an email address, even if it's obviously fake. Rather use something like childish email here, otherwise your comment will not be seen. We do not allow any type of personal information, even if it's supposed to be fake. See Rule N4 for more details. Thanks. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit. Message composed to =r AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns. My uncle did this. Showed up for a mass interview. They said they would call people they wanted after. He didn't get a call, but found out where people were supposed to go the first day. He just showed up. I think when he was asked, he just told them that he had been told to come, even though his name wasn't on the list. He retired from that company about 45 years later. My boss hired someone that called the store and said, "I would like to confirm my interview is on this date." My co-worker had never actually submitted an application or resume. My boss just assumed it got misplaced. When my dad first arrived as an immigrant, he took an ESL class which among other things coached students on how to get a job. The teacher literally got up there and said, "Here's how you get a job in America." Lie. So my dad lies and told a construction crew he could drive a forklift. The first day, they asked him to get on the forklift. My dad said, "Oh, I only know how to use a different model of forklift." So they taught him how to drive the forklift, and he worked there for 20 years. My dad said, "Oh, I only know how to use a different model of forklift." Very clever of him. Not me, but my dad when he was drafted for World War II. They asked if he could touch type, he said yes. I don't think he had even seen a typewriter, but they put him in intelligence because of his answer and no one ever questioned his typing skills. That's brilliant. I worked on an assembly line making oil field tools. Told them I had oil field experience. Got sent to an offshore oil rig a few months later. Turns out you're just picking up heavy crap and getting picked on for the first few months anyways. Well, I wanted to be a photographer, but didn't have any people I could shoot. I was in a new town, knew nobody, and had zero experience. So I put out ads for free engagement photos from a professional photographer who was switching fields. I figured, what could the harm be if it was free? If they hated the photos, they could just pay someone for a real session. So I actually get a couple to respond. I show up to the shoot, and they're both drop dead gorgeous, and I realize I'll never get another chance like this again. So I shot everything. I think in a 2-hour shoot, I ended up with something like 12,000 photos on 6 SD cards. I was so concerned about focus that I would literally put the camera on burst mode and shoot off like 30 photos as I manually turned the focus ring through its full arc so that at least one of them would be in focus. I was shooting from in the ocean, climbing cliffs, full sniper mode in the sand. I was relentless. Then I spent 3 straight weeks editing for like 12 hours a day, basically using these photos to teach myself Lightroom and Photoshop. I delivered them 400 finished photos, and lo and behold, they loved them. I put those up on my website, was off to the races, and now 8 years later it's my career and I've done about 800-900 weddings. You literally brute forced your way into taking quality photos. If you take a few thousand then at least a few have to be impressive. Glad it worked out for you either way. I got away with it. I was desperate for work after grad school and lied about my skills in Salesforce, CRM software, when asked about it at the interview. I'd never even heard of it before. I claimed I've used it plenty, and the interviewer kept asking one question after another about Salesforce and I was so desperate, and also so embarrassed about lying, that my only choice was to lie even further to cover up the original lies. So by the end of the interview, I had dug myself into a hole of lies so deep, the only way I got out of it was because my new manager has obviously never used Salesforce herself either. So I get the job, and I'm thrown headfirst into becoming the team's new Salesforce wizard. Thankfully it was pretty easy to learn, and since I used it every day all day long, I'd become pretty skilled at it in a few weeks. It's now the most honest part of my resume. TBF. Unless you're in the dev side, Salesforce couldn't be more user intuitive. If you've used Facebook, you've used Salesforce. My very first job in finance was as a data entry clerk for a mortgage lender. They asked if I could type 70 plus WPM. I lied and said I could. I really could type about 25 WPM. When I got the offer, I spent every day till my hire date practicing the crap out of my typing speed. Got up to about 50 WPM, which was enough to overlook my first 2 weeks of the job. By the time I got promoted to underwriting a year later, could easily type 80 plus WPM and knew 10 key by touch. Nothing builds skill like practice and panic, aka PP. I got an insultingly small raise for speaking a second language, and since none of my bosses spoke Spanish, they never figured out that my skill level was comparable to that of a toddler. All of our Hispanic customers found it adorable. College buddy left after 4 years or so. Couple years later we are hanging out and here's our energy commodity analyst. WTF. Lied and said he had a mathematics degree. They never checked. He did well. Couple years later he gets a huge promotion to switch to another company. Tells the truth that time. They hire on the condition he finishes his degree. They got busy. Told him to drop out. He is now a C-level executive of a smaller energy logistics company. This is why I lie. It wasn't on my resume. But when I was in my early 20s, 55 now, I was working for a company doing basically video editing. They needed someone in the IT department, and the manager knew I had a home PC and asked me if I knew anything about mainframes. I lied, said I did, and he transferred me. He figured out pretty quickly that I was full of crap, decided I was still the best candidate, rolled up his sleeves and taught the crap out of me. Over 30 years later, he's still the best boss I ever had. Taught me how to be a husband and a father, taught me how to manage projects large and small and how to manage teams large and small. Still one of my best friends. Considers me his second son and I certainly consider him my second father. And I've had an IT career ever since. Been the director of IT for 3 separate companies. Plus owned my own technical consulting firm, etc. So, that little lie worked out pretty good, I think. As someone about to enter the professional world, this gives hope that I'll find a mentor like this. I feel like very few end of college adults truly know what they're gonna do with their degree and it's daunting. It's reassuring hearing these kinds of stories. Not me, but I remember seeing someone who clearly did. I got hired as a contractor for a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of. They had a lean fiscal year and laid off a large portion of their front office people. Me and the person were hired to help fill in some holes left by the people let go. On our first day we were being shown some basic tasks and how to work with the database. I had a notebook with me and was taking some notes and asking a lot of questions. The other person looked like they saw a ghost. By the time we came back from lunch the other person miraculously got a better job offer and left never to return. I hired someone like this. In the interview he claimed to have experience working with all of our equipment and we hired him. He showed up from Alaska and had absolutely no idea what any of it was or how it worked. I spent 3 months training him on the most basic equipment and he couldn't figure it out. I feel like the lesson in this thread is if you're not smart enough to learn how to do the job, then don't lie and say you already know how to do the job. Not me, but a guy I've worked with on occasion had gone to school to become an architect. There was a prestigious firm that he really wanted to work for, but they kept rejecting him. Still, he didn't stop applying, and one day they said they had an opening but it wasn't for architecture, rather wayfinding, like designing directional signage etc. for facilities or even cities, and they asked if he had experience doing this. He lied and said yes and got the job. Now the guy is in his 70s, about to retire, and is super well known for his creative and clever wayfinding systems. He found his way at last. Not me, but have a friend who had basically zero experience in IT security make his help desk experience on a resume look like he handled security related tasks and issues for years. Ended up getting an entry level IT security position and today is now a senior IT security engineer making $150k. And people wonder why our data keeps getting leaked from security breaches at massive companies. The senior level IT security engineer is actually the help desk guy. I said I was proficient in software I had never used before. When I got asked for an interview, I learned enough to BS my way through. When I got the job, I spent the next 2 weeks learning the crap out of that software. 6 years of using it all day every day, and training other people how to use it. I'd say I did pretty good. My teacher in college said to lie, and by the time they figured out you lied, you should have learned what you lied about. Not me but my sister. A little background, we're mixed-ish. Our dad is white and our mom is Hispanic. I learned Spanish later on but my sister never learned it. But maybe because my mom and I are fluent in both Spanish and English, I guess my sister thought she was fluent in Spanish by proxy. So on her application she lied and said she was fluent in Spanish. She didn't know at the time, but the company's clientele was roughly 85% Hispanic, most of whom spoke little to no English. She had the job for a couple hours. Well, they always speak it. I'm sure I've learned enough of it by just being around them. Said I could do pivot tables. Had a very basic knowledge of Excel. Got the job and literally never had to do a pivot table. Picked up a lot just by playing around with Excel too. I feel like anyone with basic knowledge can work out Excel, Word and PowerPoint, and if there is ever something specific you can always Google it. We hired someone who lied on their resume. It took about 2 weeks but we fired them. They later applied to a similar position with a different team in the same company and referenced working on my team. So yeah, they didn't get hired when the obvious reference check was made. I've also known of 2 cases where people were so bad at their jobs, it prompted someone to look up their degree and find it was fake. They got fired, and in one case sued. If you are going to lie, try to not lie big, or about something easily provable. After reading all of the stories about how the lying worked out, I am relieved to read this and know that all my years of being honest when applying for jobs may have saved me from this sort of humiliation. I didn't technically lie, but I certainly beefed up my CV and got a job that I was way underqualified for. The guy I was taking over from was a trained accountant and had been doing the job for 16 years. I was 23. However, I just kept telling myself they wanted some young blood, someone to bring fresh ideas and not be an accountant. So that's how I played it. It wasn't until my first day that I got to begin a handover with the incumbent that I realized. It was at this moment I fricked up. I was blown away by the first 5 minutes, and this role sat across 2 separate business elements with constant communication with all parties, heads of development, program managers, project managers et al. I just left a job selling doors. Anyhow, somehow I managed to blag it for 6 months and the entire portfolio didn't collapse. I eventually got let go when our team amalgamated with another which had mirrored personnel and my oppo was 20 years into the role. To be honest, when I left, I was relieved. I don't stress much, but the constant fear of being caught out was hard to cope with. The money, however, was excellent. Anyway, I now sell doors again. Who knew? I got a gig as an all-in-one IT tech and overstated my qualifications just a bit. I had never done any physical networking projects. My boss got wise after a week or 2 and confronted me, but not in a mean way. He assumed maybe he didn't explain the job very well. He told me the expectations, and that he knew I wasn't proficient in all of those things. Then he said that he thought I was smart enough to figure this out, but that I needed to work extra hard at making up the lost ground and to always come back to him if I thought my work needed looking over. He could have fired me, but he gave me a chance. I worked hard 50, 60, 70-hour weeks sometimes, and he always approved the overtime to get caught up, but I did it. I'm now the IT director of a nationwide company US, and I try very hard to find people who need the same opportunities I was gifted. Gatekeeping sucks. Hold people accountable, but give them a chance to prove themselves. I was running the network for a pretty big company and the boss hired a temp to help me with the project. He claimed to have a lot of experience with Cisco routers. Within 2 days it was obvious that he had no experience at all, didn't even know how to log into the router. He was fired by my company and blacklisted by the temp agency. I applied for a job as a truck driver. The only experience I had was in a vehicle the size of a small U-Haul, delivering for a Vietnam veterans fundraising organization. Almost 18 years later, I'm still behind the wheel for the same company, and I've gotten my commercial driver's license. When an old job was shutting down, I helped a co-worker find a legitimate but then closed down business college, probably was for a for-profit college, to put down on his resume for a fabricated associate's degree. Its records might have been rolled into another college that took it over, but the paper trail was surely difficult to determine. At least that is what he hoped. I know that he went on to a far better job position than he had been in after we were laid off. Spent a weekend teaching myself PHP. Ended up not actually using it for the job even though they listed it on the requirements. This was back in early 90s. Changed my GPA grades to get to the minimum required on interim transcript. Got the job. Launched my career. 100% worth it. 0% regrets. I had the opposite. I never professed to know anything, but the company that hired me were enterprising to say the least. They'd hire me out for a fiendish fee to install systems I'd never used before. It was really annoying and stressful, as they seemed to think the less I knew about an upcoming job the better. I did shout at my line manager on at least one occasion. The worst one I had to go to age 19 was to install a big system at a multinational company. I'd never been in offices so corporate and high-tech, let alone seen the system I was installing. It turned out they weren't hiring in a contractor because they didn't have their own staff like usual. They had a whole department of people who were far more experienced than me. Normally I'd get the opportunity to install on my own, but this company had promised a few of their staff they could watch me to learn about the system installation. I'll never forget opening the box and pulling the contents out upside down and a chap in his 50s saying, "Why do I get the feeling you've never seen one of these before?" I learned to control my facial expressions a bit more after that. The thing was semi-straightforward. I got it finished, but then found I had to train their 15-strong team on the system. Everything I'd learned the past 2 days and googled in the evenings. If you have a brain and nerve, you can do anything. I've found it's mostly our most highly qualified appointments that are nightmares to work with. Oh god, that sounds hectic. Sweating while following the instructions and trying to sound reasonably confident. I lied, but spent a lot of my free time in work and became good at it. Now 10 years later, my boss told me that that I lied. Lying on your resume doesn't really matter when your line manager is related to the big boss and doesn't know crap either. Sounds like my company. Family company who employs their relatives and friends with no previous knowledge of our field. Mostly because no one wants to work there and the money is crap. Unless you're related. Made up some bull's reason to turn it down because there's a good chance I could have hurt myself or someone else in that position. I just went to the interview to practice up for another interview I had later that week. A while back in the early 2000s, I applied for a summer job 1 year. It was mainly an admin job in their HR marketing depth, but the company was hosting an event and needed someone to build a website for it. I had only ever done something like this once before in school using Microsoft Publisher, and I exaggerated my ability to do it, but they bought it. Got there and they used Adobe Dreamweaver, and I had little to no idea what I was doing because I'm rubbish at HTML and just all coding in general, and this was before sites like Stack Overflow where I could get handed the help. I'm more tech savvy than the average person, but not good enough to be someone who you would want to pay to do tech work. So basically I went to a lot of different sites and copied the HTML code for tables and such and tried to modify it to match my use case, and doing a lot of googling to figure out how to do things in the software. The site was basic and not in any way pretty, but it was functional and that was good enough for them. I love Dreamweaver. Got a job working for a particle physicist repairing stuff like MRI machines in hospitals. He hired me because I can read schematics. They had to fire me because an X-ray machine exploded in a chiropractor's office while I was repairing it. Please tell me this story. I hope everyone was okay. In the early 90s, we had a friend, I'll call him Bob, who was kind of an average guy who hung around the goth crowd, but worked at Egghead Software, a popular retail software chain at the time. Bob was tolerated. Sad to say, he wasn't hated, but he wasn't invited anywhere unless he invited himself. and then no one wanted to specifically throw him out and look like a jerk. He was obnoxious, a little bit of a pathological liar, and kind of sloppy around the edges in a mildly irritating way. A lot of people who were in the goth and punk community started getting IT and tech jobs around the start of the dot-com boom. Bob didn't have a degree, wasn't very skilled, and didn't have a lot of soft skills either. So Bob decided that everyone was getting these high-tech jobs, so he would too. Only he didn't know much beyond being a clerk at a software store, so he lied. Big time. He claimed he had a college degree, certifications, and lied about all this experience from previous jobs at companies he never worked for. He knew just enough buzzwords to land himself a technical position at a local IT firm. I am not sure how, but there was a shakeup at the company, and he ended up getting himself an IT manager's position. During this time, he told the company his certs had expired, and he needed to re-up, so they sent him to training. After a few years, he really had certifications. Then the company got bought out, and he stayed. During this time, he decided to go back to school, despite never having more than a high school education. Then the company folded, but now he had experience at an impressive title, actual certifications, and companies didn't care much about his college. He wasn't unemployed for long. He landed a job at another company, again lying about his management skills, and became CTO. He finished his degree and left for another company, making six figures for some tech startup that eventually failed. A lot of us were angered and a bit jealous of Bob. Like, he lied and then used his lies to actually get real credentials, whereas most of us were clawing through stuff honestly, and it made you just rethink your whole life perspective. And he was still insufferable. Only now he was more of an arrogant douche with a head waggle. Then he went into local politics, and I last heard that did him in, and he got in some hot water for fraud, although my story on that isn't clear and could have been embellished by some bitter friends by the time it got to me. People who got away with this crap are lucky, or work for really poorly managed companies. My stepmom is a solicitor for a big insurance firm, and every year when they take in their new set of graduates they set aside a room for them to do their last edit of their resume before they officially submit them. If they are hired, they go through their academic and work history, and fire everyone who made a false claim. She told me there are sometimes legal ramifications for those who make obviously fraudulent claims. There are numerous people effectively fired immediately due to this every intake. I had no clue how to detail cars, but filed for a business license and started advertising mobile detailing. The first car I did, I used a spray bottle with a whipper down solution to wash it, and I didn't have money for a vacuum, so I literally handpicked the carpets inside. I did 3 cars that day in 3 hours for a total of $120. I was making about that after taxes for an 8-hour day at the time. That was the moment I decided to quit my job. I figured crap out real fast while reinvesting every penny for the next 3 years. It's been 6 years since that first car now, and I have a 1,500 square foot shop in the wealthiest part of the entire metro area, a loyal client base, and we work exclusively on high-end cars. The business generates over $250,000 a year in gross revenue. I am fortunate to have been able to hire my much younger brother at a livable wage and give him opportunities and learning experiences that very few people are ever afforded. I now manage the financials and oversee the function of the business while also working for the county, while my brother runs the daily operations, which he does very well. I felt kind of bad that I lied in order to get my current job. Turns out the ability to lie is the most valuable prerequisite within the sales industry. Did the same. Still here 4 years later making good money and selling awesome products. I applied for a major job before I actually graduated college. It was one of Forbes' top jobs to get in the US out of college, and I applied early because I heard it took 1-2 years to even get an interview if you're overqualified. So technically I lied on my resume and said I had a degree when I was really 1 semester away from graduating. In an act of pure luck I got a call and was offered the job if I passed a series of tests that they had. I contemplated telling the truth but decided that I'd never get a second chance if I fessed up. I passed the test, got the job, and figured they'd find out and just fire me. The whole week I was a nervous wreck. Then the HR lady who hired me decided on a whim to quit her job and move to Italy to teach. The person who took over her job didn't have a memo to do a background check on my degree and I never heard about it again. This was more of an embellishment than a lie, but I listed that my co-workers and I meet weekly for team building and critical thinking exercises that often force us to think from somebody else's point of view and make decisions from out of our comfort zone. The SGT interviewing me knew exactly what I was saying and asked me what my preferred class and race is. I told him that I'm the DM and the LT and the interview needed me to explain everything that was unfolding in front of him. TLDR. I got hired in a law enforcement job because I played D&D. Your SGT was actually surprised when you answered Arakakra barbarian and not white and rich and hired you to prevent an EO investigation. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.